Yeah. Good evening, everyone. Thank you for coming out on a beautiful night. Tough decision, public informational meeting or go enjoy this beautiful weather after this long winter. But thank you again for coming out. For those of you that don't know me, my name is Chris Warborn. I'm the airport manager at Westfield Regional Airport. And with us this evening from the city of Westfield, we have our city council president, Bill Nifsky, half of the Westfield Airport Commission and the city of Westfield. Thank you for coming this evening. This is a public informational meeting about noise compatibility program update. As many of you probably know, we've had a Part 150 noise compatibility program underway here for numerous years, and I'll talk a little bit about that history. But that's the reason why we're here. We're kicking off a project that's being funded by the FAA to update our program. An easy way to think of it is we're updating our policy handbook on how we implement the noise mitigation program here with Westfield Airport. Just a few housekeeping items. If anybody needs to use a restroom, they're right outside the door across the hallway. After we do our presentation, we invite you to come into the gym. We have some boards up. And also, if you have specific questions, you certainly can ask during our session. But if you prefer to just be facility, the gym, we have boards up, you can certainly do that. For the Zoom meeting, we have everybody mute right now. At the end of the presentation, we'll unmute and you'll have a chance to also ask questions during the meeting. If there's an emergency, just because it's the airport, it's about safety, we have an exit here. There's an exit where you walked in, and there's another exit just around the corner. So, and we'll all muster out in the parking lot. So with that, I'll talk a little bit about the history of the Part 150 noise program. So back in the mid-1990s, the 104th Fighter Wing was looking at a possible aircraft conversion from the A-10s to the F-16s. And with that conversion, the airport voluntarily worked with joining the FAA Part 150 noise program. And they basically started the process, but then the F-16s did not come here. A decision was made. So the program kind of went dormant. And fast forward 2007, we have the base realignment rack, and the A-10s were replaced by the F-15. So starting in about 2008, 2009 is when the original noise compatibility program document was generated, the noise exposure map, which we have in the back, and the consultant team will talk a little bit about that. That got started, and there actually was mitigation measures done. In fact, since 2008, nearly $20 million has been put forth to do noise mitigation within the community. The majority of that funding through FAA, MassDOT, and the city of Westfield. So for tonight, we have Jones Payne Group is our on-call consultant team. They're specifically hired to work on noise mitigation efforts. I think some of you have worked with Wiley, KBR Wiley in the past. They actually kind of transitioned out of the noise mitigation business, and we went out for consultant selection last year, and they didn't actually end up applying or submitted a proposal. But Jones Payne Group does noise mitigation and the type of work that we're doing here all across the country, in New England in particular. So we have a very experienced team here that's going to help guide us through this process. So with that, I'll turn it over to Diane Carter. She's going to introduce her team to you, and we'll go through the presentation. We'll take any questions you have, and then we'll go into the gym to look at the boards if you want to. So thank you for your time, and I'll turn it over to Diane.
Thanks, Chris. Good evening, everyone. I'm just going to pull the presentation up here. Technology these days, huh? Okay. You want to go to that? So good evening. I am Diane Carter. I'm with the Jones Payne Group, and I'm the project manager for the Noise Compatibility Program update. With me, I have Brianna Whiteman and Christina Mastro-Antonio in the back. And we also have HMMH with us. We'll be introducing themselves as they start their presentation. We are responsible for the overall study. However, HMMH is a technical lead. They've done hundreds of Part 150s across the country, and we'll be able, between the two of us, we're hoping to take a look at what you have here and come up with recommendations to keep the program going and be refreshed. We have a technical advisory committee that we formed as part of the FAA regulations. We have to interact with users of the airport. So we've selected about 8 different entities to help us take a look at what the program is and what we would like to do to update it. So they will be meeting over the next 3 to 6 months and developing recommendations for the airport. And then that will come back to a public hearing with you in the fall so you can hear what types of things the airport's considering for the future. There are 3 major entities, as you've heard me just say. City of Westfield is ultimately responsible for the Part 150 process. They are the ones who will make the recommendations based on input from the Technical Advisory Committee and comments received from all of you. The FAA is the funding authority who looks at the recommended program, approves or disapproves each type of measure, and we'll talk a little bit about that. And those that are approved, then the airport and the city can apply for grant funds to enact things like sound insulation and land acquisition. With that, I'm going to turn it over to HMMH. They do their introductions. I apologize. We have about a 30-minute presentation, and then we'll break and answer, take questions and provide answers. I do want to remind everybody this meeting is being recorded. So if you have specific questions about your home, when we start talking about things like land acquisition or sound insulation, you might want to save those for after the meeting has stopped, because this will be something that will be out on the internet. So thank you very much. Kate?
Thank you, Diane. I'm Kate Larson. I'm a senior consultant with HMMH and the project manager for HMMH for this project. This is Dominic Scarano. He's the assistant project manager. He won't be speaking. And Gene will introduce himself when he speaks. Okay. I'm going to talk a little bit about noise terminology so that you get a little bit of background for the noise metrics that we use to measure and monitor noise and to predict noise. And the first thing I want to mention is peak noise. When you're hearing me talk right now, how loud is it? Well, I have a sound level meter on my phone, so I can tell you how loud it is. Here, when I'm holding it up, it's fluctuating, constantly fluctuating. So when I'm actually speaking, it's louder. When I stop or pause, it drops down to, looks like about 35 decibels. And when I'm speaking pretty close to the monitor, it goes up to 65, 70 decibels. You might be familiar with that. You may have one on your own phone to measure noise when an airplane flies over. But a lot of times when we talk about noise, we talk about how loud it gets, that absolute, oh, I'm sorry. I need to not touch that. The highest noise level, which we call Lmax, or the maximum noise level. This is a diagram of a sample, maybe a military jet flyover, and it reached 102.5 decibels, which is quite loud. But you can see that it was quick, too. The aircraft approaches quickly and then quickly flies away. So there's a quick ramp up and then drop down of the noise. So how do you talk about that compared to, say, a helicopter flyover, which might take a lot longer and be a lot less in absolute magnitude? How do you compare those two things? How annoyed you might be or how disruptive they might be to what you're doing? So then we talk about something that we call sound exposure level, or SEL. And for that, we take the duration into account as well. So you're looking at the whole hill of noise. And in order to compare them, we smush it all together into what would be equivalent for 1 second. So we take the noise energy and take the equivalent for 1 second. And then we can compare them. 2 noise events have the duration and the magnitude. together for comparing them. We also have this metric called LEQ, or the equivalent level. And for that, we take the noise energy and average it over how many seconds it lasted. So what was the energy average for each second of the duration of the event? We can do it for an event. We can do it for a minute, an hour, a 6-hour school day, or any length of time. We just average it by the seconds. So then we have these hourly. This is a day, and there are 24 light blue boxes here for 24 hourly LEQs. And you can see some are louder, some are quieter. And at night, this is 10 p.m. and that's 7 a.m. At night, it's definitely quieter. Most people are sleeping. And during that time, when we calculate, I didn't even touch it. When we calculate the DNL, or day-night average sound level, as the FAA requires us to use for these noise studies, we add 10 decibels to everything from strictly 10 p.m. to 7 a.m. And that's to account for the greater intrusiveness of noise at night, when people are sleeping, relaxing, and background noise is quieter then. So that is, in a nutshell, the noise terminology. We'll have this graphic on boards in the gym. So if you want to talk more about this, if I said anything that was a little confusing or whatever, I'll be standing near that board in the gym. This is another comparison of absolute sound level, or what you hear, what you would see on a sound level meter, and DNL, or day-night average sound level. This thermometer shows 0 to 110 decibels, various noises that you'd hear in the community. These are indoor noise levels, and we'll again have this board in the other room so you can see more closely. But a rock band up here, a concert, I did it again. Threshold of hearing down here. We've got a bedroom at night, a dishwasher in the next room, a food blender 3 feet away. Over here, we have a commercial jet flyover, or a military jet flyover at 1,000 feet up here, between 100 and 110 decibels. Down to things like a lawn tiller. I put the NFL fake crowd noise on here at 70 decibels. During the pandemic, the NFL players were a little freaked out by the lack of crowd. So they actually pumped in noise and made it be 70 decibels right around the area where they were playing, so that they could play with their usual comfort zone of noise. That is all in A-weighted decibels, just sound that you hear as you hear it. And over there, you see day-night average sound level. That is different. You can't hear day-night average sound level. You can't hear the average, because the time goes by, you kind of forget what you heard before, and your brain doesn't work that way. But in order to quantify, for purposes of determining whether the place where people are living is compatible or not compatible with the noise environment, the government, the FAA in particular, has set 65 dBA DNL, day-night average sound level. So 65 on this scale, like I said, it's about what you hear when I'm talking. Over here, it's somewhere around a noisy urban area, maybe downtown Springfield. Maybe in Westfield, DNL tends to be more down here, depending where you are in the community. So the important thing to remember is that there is a 10-fold weighting, or a 10 decibel increase for nighttime noise. All the federal agencies that deal with aviation noise use this metric, and we are required to use the metric. Gene, would you like to take over?
Sure. So I'll talk a little bit now about what is Part 150, what is this land use compatibility study that we're doing. It actually came about from the in 1979, Congress passed the Aviation Safety and Noise Abatement Act, also known as ASNA in our industry, that really told the FAA that they had to do certain things to address aircraft noise in the country. It's really, you can see that 79, it was after the dawn of the jet age there, which happened in the late 60s. But really, there was more and more operations happening. The Congress did let the FAA know that you need to do something, and this is Part 150 is what they codified. And it's actually codified under Title 14 of the Code of Federal Regulations, Part 150, which is why now everybody just calls it Part 150. It is a voluntary process. Airports do not have to participate in the Part 150 program. But over 250 airports, it's well over 250, might even be close to 300 airports now across the United States have actually participated. And I would say the main reason they do that is to get access to federal funds to help them implement their noise compatibility program. So the noise compatibility program is, what are you going to do if you find you have parcels that are incompatible with your aircraft noise? What are you going to do to address those incompatible land uses? Part 150 does prescribe standards and systems for those things that were in the ASNA Act of 1979, told the FAA, these are the things you need to do. So, of course, Part 150 does prescribe standards and systems for measuring. For estimating cumulative noise exposure, which the FAA chose the day-night average sound level, as Kate mentioned earlier, or the DNL, and do so using a computer model, which the FAA has their own model that you use to determine the noise exposure around airports. It describes noise exposure. What is noise exposure? Kate described it, and the S sound exposure level, or SEL, that she showed, the whole energy of that noise event from the time you start hearing it until you stop hearing it, that's the total noise energy of an event. So you add all those together, put them into like what I call a DNL bucket. One aircraft goes over, you put that in, another one goes over, you put that in, and then you average it over the 24-hour period, and you get your 65 DNL or your DNL, whatever it is. It also requires that you coordinate with local land use jurisdictions. And the reason for that is that if you want to mitigate using land use type, whether it's zoning or want to do land acquisition, those sorts of things, the airport nor the FAA have jurisdiction over land use. And so what's in there is that you coordinate with those jurisdictions and work together to come up with your noise compatibility program. It does talk about documenting the analytical process. So I don't know if you saw the map when you came in, but that's the airport's noise exposure map, their current map that the FAA has accepted as their current map. So that's the map that they use now to determine their land use compatibility. And that, when you mention noise exposure map to people, that's what they think you're talking about. So the FAA noise exposure map is actually a document, pretty voluminous document, probably somewhere between 50 and 300 pages of information, because it really specifies all the documentation that you have to provide about what went into the noise model, all the steps that you did to come up with that noise exposure map. And then it talks about how to submit the documentation to the FAA, because the FAA has to accept the documentation that's being done according to Part 150. And then the FAA also then approves or disapproves each of the noise compatibility program measures that the airport recommends in this process. And also, the FAA really sees this as an opportunity to reach out to the community, which is why we're here today, to let you know today is really about what is it we're embarking on, what is it we're about to do. And so that's part of that public review process. So before we submit any documentation to the FAA, we have to be sure that it's put out and that they've had ample opportunity to provide comments to that. And so it explains that you really need to reach out to your communities and try to get their understanding of what it is you're submitting and any input they may have. So I've talked about most of this already, but it's worth reiterating. There are two. I'll start on the right-hand side because I've already talked about noise exposure map and noise compatibility program. Those are two separate elements, and I'll go into further details of those in a little bit. In addition to consulting with the jurisdictions and the communities, also it's required that you have FAA regional officials involved in the process, that air traffic control involved in the process, also the people that use the airport. So the pilots, fixed-based operators, people that just work at the airport and use the airport, you have to involve them, and also any parties interested in reviewing on the reports, which is why, again, you put it out for public review. Next slide. So here is the map that you saw walking in. It is the existing Westfield Barnes Regional Airport Noise Exposure Map. It is, so when you complete a noise exposure map, you do it for 2 years. You represent 2 years, I should say, in the document. One is the year that you submit the document, and the other is about 5 years out from that time period. So in here, they did it in 2019, which is when they submitted it to the FAA for acceptance. And then they also did the forecast of 2024. So that map that you saw when you walked in that's shown there is the forecast one. It's the 2024 noise exposure map, which means that's the map that the airport is to use to address the incompatible land uses that exist based on that map. And if they apply for federal funding, that's the people within, or the parcels that are shown as not being compatible, they can use federal funding to address those incompatible land uses based on that. Next one. So with the map, then what is compatible, what's not compatible? We've summarized here a little bit, but the FAA actually has a pretty large table with a lot of notes involved with it as to what is compatible and not compatible. First and foremost, the FAA considers any land use outside of the 65 DNL contour, or land uses in the sense that are not exposed to aircraft noise of 65 DNL or higher, as being compatible. So it's only when you have noise exposure inside the 65 DNL contour, or meaning that they're 65 DNL or higher, that they begin to be incompatible. And so that's why you see that chart there, that DNL less than 65 dB, second to the left column there, all the land uses are compatible. And then as you start moving up from 65 to 70, 70 to 75, and greater than 75, you get more and more incompatible type land uses that, like residential's incompatible at 65 and above, mobile home parks are, transient lodging is, schools are, and then hospitals and nursing homes, they sort of are. You see that they have to have special conditions. What that 25 and that 30 represent there is the noise level reduction you need of that structure of the school or the nursing home or the hospital. They need a certain level of noise reduction and be able to show that you have that noise reduction, because it's really about the inside use of those properties to show them that they would be compatible, but only if they met those. So the project that we're doing starting essentially today is actually the noise compatibility program update. So they have, the airport has their 2024 noise exposure map. That is their map that they use for implementing their noise compatibility program. Now we're facing updating that program. Do they have the right measures in that program? Are there measures that maybe aren't there that they would like to be there? Are there, now that they've done some of this mitigation already at this point, and maybe there's some things that they would do differently, or maybe there's some things to take a look at. So in Part 150, what's shown here are basically three major categories of noise mitigation, if you will, or measures that you look at in noise compatibility program. The middle one there are noise abatement strategies, and that's where you kind of start. Can we do anything with how the aircraft fly, where the aircraft fly, runway use, any modifications to the airport layout that would make sense to try to do, things like that. So those are the noise abatement strategies. Why you start there? Because that provides benefit to the people on the ground, where you don't have to then go and mitigate things. You might be able to remove some incompatible land uses without doing mitigation, because you can do it through what we call operational measures or noise abatement strategies. The next step you look at is, okay, now that we've done that and analyzed that to see what benefits we can get, for those that are still incompatible, you then look at land use strategies. What can we do now to mitigate those incompatible land uses, such as land acquisition, sound insulation, things like that? And then lastly on here are the programmatic measures. Those are the measures that the airport undertakes to actually implement their noise compatibility program. So say they have land acquisition and sound installation as part of their program, the programmatic measures tell them, okay, how are we going to do this? What's the policy? If we are to do sound installation, do we start with the loudest first? Those types of things. All those are kind of programmatic measures and how you actually implement the program.
We have a graphical error here. But I
And
think.
you were going to go back,
sort
right,
of-
Diane?
Yes, thank you.
Maybe
So we were going to talk about the history of noise compatibility here at Westfield, but as Chris said, it started in the early 2000s, and an ongoing program here, as many of you know, the land acquisition and sound installation program. And they've also have some other measures that are in their current NCP, which was approved in 2017. And that includes some departure procedures for aircraft when they're taking off, to turn to certain headings as they depart the runway. It's including the land acquisition, where the homes are purchased, you're relocated, and the homes are demolished. The sound insulation program, there is a place of worship that would be eligible that's inside the contour. If you didn't want land acquisition or sound insulation, sell an easement to the airport for cash. They've also looked at land use zoning, an overlay district, and some building code modifications. And an overlay district is an area around the airport, essentially the noise contour, where certain restrictions are put in so that if you're building new residential or new buildings, you're ensuring that those are brought up to a noise level standard so that you're not impacted when you're inside the homes. You know, sound insulation is about when you're in the home, it can be quiet and you can hear the TV and you can talk on your phone. There's not a lot you can do about the outside, but it does provide some relief. They also had a noise advisory committee for a while. That was sunsetted several years ago. There wasn't a lot of interest, but something to think about whether that should be resurrected. We always recommend to update the noise exposure map in the NCP because that's how the funding happens for the airport to provide all these other programs, as well as working with the airport operators with a fly quiet program. Be sensitive for nighttime hours, avoid certain areas when they're departing or arriving, and a community awareness program, which is what we have now. And Chris does a lot to try and get the news out about what's happening on the airport and with the Air National Guard. So that's what we have existing. It's ongoing. It's been in place for a long time. We're just going to take a look to see if do all these measures still make sense. Do we still want to move those forward? Do we need to make any modifications to them? So here is our schedule. We're here at the kickoff. We're going to be having the 4 TAC meetings now through June. That's with the Technical Advisory Committee, looking at those programmatic measures, the operational measures, the land use measures, and the programmatic measures. We're going to prepare a draft document, which is then going to be put out for the public to take a look at. We'll have a public hearing in the October timeframe, very much like this. Here's what we had, here's what we're recommending. Tell us what you think, what would you like to see, what you don't like about it. The airport will take all of that information in and submit a final recommendation to the FAA. The FAA gets 180 days to review the program and then issue their approval of the individual measures. So we're hoping to have this wrapped up by the end of the year, January, and then the FAA can take up to 180 days. As Jean says, they usually take 179 days. Sometimes here in the New England region, we get it done a little faster, but that's the schedule we're looking at. That will allow Chris then and the city to apply for grants for any of the recommended measures. Sound insulation is something that their city is interested in continuing, so we can get that project up and running and started again. But we want to make sure that everybody has a chance to comment and be part of the process. If there are things that you'd like to see or things you feel strongly should be kept in the project program or you don't think should be kept in the program, that's all information that's important to the city and the airport as they consider moving forward. With that, that'll wrap up our brief presentation. We're happy to open it up to questions. Let me just hit the escape key.
Stop share.
Stop share. So we can unmute for those 19 people.
And remember, we also have an open house at the gym.
Yes.
Around the corner
Right
here.
over there where we have a lot of what you've seen here on board. So if you want to ask specific questions of the consultants, airport, whatever, we're over there, more one-on-one type of situation as well, but go ahead.
So do you,
Now, are there any questions in the room? And then we'll certainly go to those that are joined virtually, but any questions? Yes.
Yes, you said or mentioned that this is being recorded, hearing evidence speaking. So is this presentation also going to include all the slides recorded?
correct.
And how would residents have access, or where do they get access to this presentation?
So after the meeting, it'll take a day or two to get the recording downloaded from the Google Drive that's on here, and it'll be on the city website. So we'll have the presentation under the Westfield Barnes Regional Airport, the city's website, cityofwestfield.org, or Westfield Barnes Regional Airport. We'll have the video as well as PowerPoint.
And there'll be an article in the newspaper alerting people the fact that this exists where they can go and get it.
Yep, I saw Amy Porter from the Westfield Evening News is joining us virtually, so I expect she'll reach out. We did, prior to the meeting, reach out to, we did a press release to all the major outlets. So we were hoping we'd have a little bit more turnout, do have at least one virtually through Westfield News, but we will get the word out. I also talked with City Council President Iski about the next City Council meeting. I'm going to ask for 5 minutes to give an update about the meeting we had tonight and talk a little bit about this. So, or people probably watch the City Council meetings and something. So I'll be going before the council when that gets scheduled.
And are you doing specific or more outreach to those neighborhoods like EJ communities, local residents that live alongside the road?
So I'll let the technical piece about the EJ communities. I know we have another project going on where we're doing outreach to the environmental, justice communities. And that's a separate thing. Now, through this process, I don't know if it's required, like in an EA process, there's certain outreach that's required. I don't know if that is with noise compatibility study.
Yeah, so with this project, it's a land use compatibility study. So what we try to do is get the information out to those people living within the contours that you see there. So that we don't necessarily reach out to every individual homeowner, but try to get the word out to your neighbors as well. The press release, you can't tell the press what to put on their media, but we will continue to do that. Is there any other outreach that we're doing?
So I know in another project we're working on, there are certain groups that were identified. So we'll get this information out to those groups. I'll make sure that happens. Their representatives.
That would be good, because even though it might not be, you're talking about the legal review,
Yes.
those populations, I think, need to be included. They need to be outreached.
Right. And my understanding, just because we're working on this other project, is that there are two groups that were identified in Westfield. So we send the information to those contacts for those organizations. Certainly, I have an open door policy, my phone, I answer, phone calls, emails, whatever, people reaching out, we can follow up with questions.
Does this mitigation that we're about to go through have anything to do with the proposed new planes that they want to bring into the airport?
It does not. The fighter conversion is a completely separate project. This is just looking at our program, the noise exposure map that is there that generates the eligibility and compatible measures, incompatible land use measures that we're going to come up to address is based on this map. It has nothing to do with the new fighters. There will be a completely separate process for that. That initially will start with the Air National Guard. In fact, they have a consultant right now. They did a project kickoff internally, and they will be having public meetings separate from us and doing their own analysis. Once that is all approved, know which fighter we're going to get, and the federal government signs off on their environmental reports, we will then reach out to FAA and say, hey, we need to take a look at our noise exposure map. The key thing is when the new fighters would arrive, whichever fighter we end up getting. And from what we can tell, it probably it would be 2025, maybe 2026. And this map is good through 2024.
Good through.
So the timing may work out where the federal government will make their decision. That'll enable us to do our own map, that we can actually do mitigation measures that are eligible for FAA funding. The military will generate a map for their study. That map is not the map that allows us to do mitigation in the community. The FAA, we have to use the FAA noise exposure modeling in their map that they accept. That's what we'll have to do once we know which fighter. So hopefully I answered your question. I apologize about that.
Well, I could also say that this is a little bit differently too, is that map is good through 2024 unless something else changes. But also the FAA doesn't let you update that map until there's an approved change. We don't know what that approved change is, but also they, as he said, they won't be here by the end of 2024. So that gives you that time to update the maps. Once you know what that change is, you then incorporate that change, redevelop the maps, and so those will be ready before, hopefully, that the change actually occurs.
Would you mind elaborating on the process that goes through to actually building one of those maps? Are there testing sites, audio testing sites that were placed throughout the community? And what's modeling basically based off of?
Okay, sure. So for this project, we're going to actually use two models, but I'll get to that in a little bit. Remember, Part 150 prescribes exactly how you measure noise and how you model noise. It also states that you can't use measured noise to determine the maps or the contours on the map. You actually have to use models. You can make measurements, and if you make measurements, tell you how to do it, but you can't even use them to adjust those contours. You can't, because measurements are usually finite periods of time, whereas the noise model requires that you actually go in and put in an annual average day of operations into the noise model. And what that means is you determine what your operations were for a year, divide those operations by 365, and that's the number of operations you put into the model. Now, what the model exists of are thousands of aircraft types in the model, in the FAA's model. The FAA's model is the Aviation Environmental Design Tool. And it has a noise component to it and have all these aircraft in it. And you put in the flight tracks where they fly, what time of day they fly, how many of them fly. So you put all that in. And so basically you think of the model as what you see out there happening. An airplane takes off, it models it. Another plane takes off, it models it. An aircraft arrives, it models that. Change direction, now it's arriving this way, it models that. So every operation you experience, it's actually modeling that flight. And then what it then spits out, if you will, are those contours. It has an algorithm in there to say, okay, these are your annual average day operations. And from those operations, you have this contour. Now we have to do that separately now for we may have, like that was done using two separate models. So we don't know what the future will be, but right, what's in that is that they also use the military's model, which is called Noise Map. And same sort of thing, but what they did is they modeled the military aircraft using the EPIC or the Air Force's model or the DoD model, and the commercial operations were done using the FAA's model, and then they were added together to develop that.
What years of sampling were generated to achieve that map?
Okay, so the map that's shown there is 2024. So what, I didn't do that. Wiley was here and did it, but I'm going to say what typically happens is what they probably did. They probably used something like all the operations that occurred in 2018 because they knew that they were going to submit in 2019. They forecast a little bit, okay, what's going to change between what we saw in 2018 and 2019. And then those are the operations they put in. And then they did a 5-year forecast. Okay, here's what we have now. Here's what the FAA is telling us, because the FAA does terminal area forecasts to tell you what your operations are going to be over the next number of years. And so they did a 5-year forecast and then put those operations through the model like that.
So when the computer models are done and they come up with this map, the computer models are looking at what is considered, this is the way in which the airplane is going to fly. However, our experience in our neighborhood is that's not what the pilots typically follow. They follow a different direction. And so, looking at the map and the original mitigation, talking with Wiley and everything, the jets typically don't fly the direction in which we were told they were always going to fly. And so, therefore, the models don't really make sense if you're not following that path.
Yeah, so just like the operations, so that's a good question. So we take all the operations, right? Where we get those operations are actually from the actual flight tracks that they flew. So what you get, and there's a number of sources for this, you can get it directly from the FAA or there are vendors that offer this data. What it is flight track and aircraft identification data so that you know exactly the aircraft type that it was and exactly where it flew coming in or taking off. And then you put that into the model. Now, Wiley, I know, doesn't put every single one of those tracks in the model. What they do is they say, oh, there's this bundle of tracks, there's this bundle of tracks, and they will like what we call bundle the tracks, and then they will make model tracks to simulate those. You can also now with the new FAA model, it actually allows you to put in every flight track, but most firms are not doing that at this point because the model, if you build your bundles right, you're still going to get a pretty good outcome of the noise levels. And if you look here, just to point out a little bit on this, so aircraft are typically flying in here. They probably turn, outside of that. So whether you got those turns out here right or not doesn't matter because the noise contour ended there. But over here, you see that there are some that are turning over that way. That's why you get some of this contour that's out over here. So it did take into, because the turn did matter in that end of the airport. That's why I wanted to just point out that, you only need to get the tracks right so far out because once that 65 contour is figured out where it is, you don't need to know what it did 2 miles away from that.
Yeah, we were originally in that contour, and then for some reason we got taken out. And when
Contours do change over time. In fact, the FAA.
I've been living there for 15 years, and it seems like it's getting noisier instead of quieter. And some of the explanation that I got was that the flights were going to be taken off to the north mostly, and then if the weather was bad, they would head towards our direction. Last year, during the summer, there were a lot of F-15s flying in our direction. And it's extremely clear. And if you look at the map, where we are, it's a different color. And it just doesn't make sense to me how they took us out when originally we were in it.
Yeah.
Because the planes didn't get quieter. And the flights really, again, I don't have data, but I live in the area, right? And it's very noisy. Right? And now you have helicopters, and then I don't know what you call that, C5s that drop in
At night.
Yeah,
That's fine.
constantly. And it's like almost, it was every Wednesday. I think yesterday was Tuesday.
Tuesday, but he was out there doing his circle today.
Yeah, it just seems like
He was practically hitting the trees. That's it. He was
I'm not
right
an
over the
expert.
house.
I'm not an expert, but I live there. And so, the explanation that was given to me I said, okay, they're gonna fly in a different direction, but it doesn't seem to be going that
Then
way.
you go left instead of right.
And the other problem that I have is that the communication, I sent emails, and I know it's not your group. I didn't get any good responses. It just seemed like, that's it, you gotta take it, and that's the way it is. So,
They came to my house and we were in the map, and then like 2 weeks later, after we took all the time off of work, Mr. For them to come into the house, they did the blueprints and everything, you're set to go. 2 weeks after, like, oh, we switched maps, no longer. Like, we took all the time of work, and it was very emotionally draining. We're taking time off.
So a little, you want?
Sure, I can talk a little bit about the map. So first year concern about lack of response. I'm not sure when that has happened, but I became airport manager here in April of 2020. Every email, phone call I get, I return. I answer. So I apologize if that didn't happen before, and if I missed something, I'm
I
sorry.
think her name was Jane, the one that was.
That was the program manager for Wiley Labs. That wasn't here.
So I don't understand how the sound pattern changes, especially where we live. It doesn't make sense. I got a house that's kitty corner from me that they tore down. I'm across the street. So it's quieter on my side than there. It doesn't make sense.
Yeah.
I don't have the equipment to test it. I'd love to have something so that you could hear the noise, or somebody just be in our neighborhood during the summer. It's loud. It's loud in my house. I get it outside. I understand, but it is loud in my house. And when the program first came out, I'm like, okay, you're going to offer us this stuff. I'm on board. You're telling us that planes are going to fly in certain directions. I'm on board. And then it seems like we're getting more flights going over our homes. And a lot. Last year, I think I counted 8 jets taken off in my direction, and several times during the week. Now, I don't have the data because I didn't sit out there and write it all out, but I do know that it's noisy, and I think it should be addressed and not ignored. Changing that line or whatever does not make sense at all.
So I'll get your information after the meeting, and I will reach back out to Wiley and find out. I'm not sure why the map changed. I wasn't here in 2018 to 2019 why the map changed. I do know it did shrink. I'm just not sure why. I don't know if it was because the operations, the input that Gene was referring to for the tracking and forecasting, maybe it was different. One thing that determines the runway to be used is the wind. So aircraft have to take off and land into the wind. Now the F-15s, they try to use runway 2. So they started down by the pike and go to the north. That's the primary departure area. But if the winds are blowing over 20 knots out of the south, so particularly in the summer, you get southwest winds, they will depart 20 over that area. They do make an effort not to use the 20 departure. The other thing is, if they sit alert, I think everybody understands they protect the Northeast. They sit alert. When they get a call from NORAD and they scramble, they have to depart to the south. They have a certain time requirement to get airborne. If they don't, they can't taxi 2 miles to take off from the airport. So they just go right out to the runway.
Yeah, I guess what I just don't understand your sound measures and how you do it, especially where we live and the homes that are being taken down around us. Just doesn't make sense.
I'll do a little research, find out why the contour did change. And I don't know, Jim, if you want to maybe just, once again, the tracking, the modeling that FAA requires us to utilize that modeling software that probably is factor.
So one thing that if you put a noise monitor where they're taking the houses down, you say you live across the street, put a noise monitor there, I can tell you you're probably going to get the same bump. That's different though than you have to draw the line in the sand somewhere, right?
Right.
Until they were told.
Right, and so what Wiley told us is there's a row of trees across from our house. So they had to stop somewhere, so they stopped at those trees. If they went past those trees, they would have had to go to the next street down, which is a quarter of a mile from where we are.
Right.
And so therefore, they had to make that line of demarcation there, no matter what the noise.
All right. Well, that's a slightly different thing. I'll get to that. That's called block rounding, if you will. Take the contours and you go out to the next block. But so you put these operations into the model, as I explained. The model is going to say where that contour is, right? It's just going to say this is where it is. It's the FAA's model. We tried it as hard as we can to get the model right. If you compare to measurements with what we modeled, if you do it right, it usually comes out right. But again, if you take it to a level just inside that 65 line, just outside that 65 line, it's still 65. That's what I was trying to say. Is if you measure across the street, it's probably going to be the same level, but that's where the line is. And that's why FAA policy as to how, they make programs. And, like I said, they have to draw the line somewhere. They are very specific that you use their model, you put in the input into their model, and it draws the line. Now, I understand what exactly you're saying, because like I said, whether inside or outside of that line, you have the same noise. The line is, but we were inside the line. Right, so something changed between the old map and the new map, and that's what doesn't make sense to me, because what did change? Well, and again, I wasn't here during that. It was a different consultant, but the maps also get updated periodically. So we're talking about probably 24 or so, the maps will be updated again. And if what you're saying is right, that they're operating differently, the winds are different, we would take that into account. We would redo the data, because every time you do this, you don't use the old data, you bring in new data every time. And then that contours are rarely ever the same, because things do change. So you won't necessarily, again, be able to hear that there's been a change, but yet the contour is somewhere else than where it was. It's just a process. It's the FAA process that we follow.
One thing, sir, you talked about the C-130s. Actually, they're flying around right now the other day. So up until about a year and a half ago, they did most of their training at Westover. Westover did a major runway project. That runway was closed for 18 months. It just recently reopened, but they don't have their instrument landing system that the pilots train on. It's not operational yet. They're waiting for FAA to check. So for the last year and a half, the units, either from Bradley, there's a unit based there. There's a unit based out of Schenectady. They have skis on it. You might see skis on the on the wheels. And then Rhode Island has a C-130. They've been practicing more frequently here. So that's why we've had.
God bless them. Let them practice.
Yeah,
you know what I mean?
That's one of the reasons. You're right. We have seen an increase in C-130 traffic here, primarily because they can't train it.
Just a new noise in Westfield. Yeah.
It's kind of going back a little bit, but I just want to make sure I understand. So I get that this is a 2019 map and it's forecasted for the 5 years. Are you saying, like, until we get the new jets or anything, like, we cannot, like, even if we're like, please just create a new map, your hands are tied? Because the way, like, your timeline is saying, we're going to be pushing 2023 and we're working on a task that was created 5 years ago. A lot has changed for a variety of reasons in the last 5 years. And it sounds like money and time is just going to be reset in 2024. Like,
so the FAA, if you're using federal funds for your noise compatibility program, the FAA actually requires that you update your maps about every 5 years.
so we can't update this.
Well, you're in the process.
Okay.
So it's all a process. Updated.
Yeah, I
The maps got updated back in 2019. Okay. Now what we're looking at, this project is taking a look at the second phase of that, and that is the noise compatibility program. Is it the right program? Okay. And then after that's done, it'll probably be about time to update the map.
Okay.
And so it's a process. You do the noise exposure map, that's based on 350 CP, and then you update your map.
It just seems silly, like it sounds like we're trying to get to the solution when we're going to be back to where we were 5 years ago, where that's going to change again, and there may be other angry people. So
Right.
that's why
So
it
what
just
we
seems
wanna
like the
do-
timeline of it's kind of
That's a great question, because what we want to do in this phase of the process, make sure that we're having that foresight. We're hearing that the fighter jets might change here.
Yeah.
So, things could be different. So let's not look at only this map that exists today, but let's write a noise compatibility program that takes into account what may the future look like, right? We don't have a crystal ball, but what we want to do with this noise compatibility program is write it in a way that it doesn't need to be updated so often, and then you focus on the exposure map. Make sure they're up.
And so if you get the new contour, you've got your noise compatibility program approved, and you're not doing another study for another year and a half, it allows the airport and the city to apply for grants right away.
That's where I kind of got
Yeah,
confused,
it's
like,
all
are we just
frustrating.
saying 2024, nothing
Yeah.
Right.
I think we probably have some questions. Maybe we can check virtually if there's anybody that has questions.
Hand raised, yeah.
Kathleen Hillman.
Hi, Kathleen Hillman here. I was wondering about how the advisory, can you talk about how the advisory commission is going to be formed?
The Technical Advisory Committee.
Yes.
Yes, so we have representatives from the airport and the airport commission and the city of Westfield and the town of Southampton, and then the users on the airport, which is the Army and the Air National Guard, the FBO, Mass DOT Aeronautics, and the FAA. And so that's
So what I'm hearing is there will be no residents on this commission. Is that what I'm hearing?
So, Mrs. Hellman, this is Chris Mullenborg, the airport manager.
Hi,
There
Chris.
is a different, good evening. There is a different advisory group that is part of this process in regards to the mitigation, the recommendations. I'm not sure if you heard early on in the presentation, there was a noise advisory group that was in place. It disbanded years ago. We're looking at putting that together. Again, that may be one of the recommendations that come out. This study that we're doing right now is going to have a very public process input. The TAC committee is different. It's the users at the airport and the FAA and the state partners. But the advisory part, what comes out of this study is we will have some sort of advisory group. I think we need to have that. Obviously, hearing comments this evening, we don't have a formal group. And, I could talk with our commission and see if that's something maybe we'll get started. We could talk about how the selection process would be formed on being in an advisory committee. So that's an IOU. I'll follow up with our airport commission and we'll take a look at maybe doing something. Instead of waiting till this is done, we could look at doing something prior to the final report being submitted.
I think that's wonderful, Chris. I have a follow-up. Are you only looking at traffic that's coming out of not the National Guard, just the base? I mean, the airport? Are you looking at both for noise mitigation? The National Guard planes as well as the planes that are located in Westfield Barnes?
Yes, so I'll answer the first part. The analysis for the noise exposure map looked at both civilian and military aircraft. It looks at all aircraft operations. So as we look at the operational characteristics as part of the noise compatibility program, this project, we will look at both civilian and military. Prior to the A-10s leaving, and I'd have to go back and find the document, but I believe the noise contour, that 65 LDN, stayed within the airport boundary. What's driving our noise program is the F-15 fighter jet. It's not the civilian traffic, but it does get looked at, to answer your question.
Perfect. And also, Chris, have they taken into account the mountain reverberation? Because I mean, when the planes take off and then they buzz my neighborhood, it's much louder than it used to be, like I told you many times. And that's their flight pattern. I've got the flight tracker and I watch those planes go around and touch down, go around and touch down, especially like around 10 o'clock in the morning and even sometimes at night. It's just really the noise level has really, has gone crazy over in our neighborhood now. I live in the Susan Drive area, as you well know.
Yeah, so the FAA's model, which is the AEDT model, Aviation Environmental Design Tool, it actually does have the capability of including terrain, which would do exactly that. If it's, if the noise hits the terrain and bounces off, it takes that into account. If the terrain shields a community from a direct line of sight to the aircraft, it takes care of that. So there is a module in the AEDT, and by looking at the contour that you have here, it's clear that they actually did use that terrain feature in developing those maps, because you wouldn't have, I don't know if you guys noticed, but some of the jaggedness in it, that wouldn't result if you didn't put the terrain feature on. That only happens because of the terrain feature, because of what she just said. You get differences happening due to terrain.
Thank you.
Welcome.
Any more hands?
Yes, David Bodendorf.
Hi, thanks. Yeah, David Bodendorf, 115 Sandy Hill Road. My house is located about a mile south of the runway, slightly to the west of the runway extended. And I would echo what the gentleman there at the meeting said about the flight path of the F-15s that I observed, particularly last summer. It seems like most of the time, their southerly takeoffs, they're turning westerly pretty quickly, to the point where they're going over my house or even west of my house. And looking at the contour map, it seems like the 65 contour is extended more southeasterly, indicating a more easterly turn of the planes, which my observations indicate are not happening. So I would suggest that, I know the map is based on the model, but if we've got information on the exact locations of all of these takeoffs, could you look at that and see if you plugged that information into the model, what happens to these contours?
Yeah, and like I was saying earlier, this is a process that we're in with Part 150. The noise exposure map, which is what you're talking about, that process is done for the time being, in that's the map that the FAA has accepted. Now this project is really looking at a noise compatibility program. But as I said, you're continually looking at the situation to see if things have changed to where you would want to update your map. But so that wouldn't occur until after we get done with the noise compatibility program. Then we will take, or airport would likely take another look at that point and see what's happening and take those into account. And I will say that one of the things that has been mentioned is, the opposite flow taking off to the south, and all that, as Chris said, is related to winds. And so winds do change. And when they used the model, they used whatever the average was at the time they did the model. The FAA's now since changed how you use wind in the model, and you actually take a 20-year average rather than a 1-year average. And so that alone could make a change, in that maybe they had the wrong assumptions for wind use, which would say that you would actually have more aircraft taken off to the south than the model. But those things are taken into account when you do the modeling. And so that update will occur after this phase of the project, which is to look at the noise compatibility program.
Gene, quick question. When we go through this project, we're going to be looking at departure procedures, arrival procedures. So the concerns that have been raised today, we need to look at. I'm sure, I think we got FAA tracking information. So we can look at.
We will be evaluating the arrivals and departures, but not in a way that would change the map.
Right, it won't affect the map, but we can verify.
Yeah, we will be
the last year, if in fact they've been turning more to the west.
Or you have more southerly flow than you used to.
Right. Yet the other thing is also when they depart from the south or depart from the north to the south, a lot of the direction of the aircraft is determined by Bradley. So whatever runway Bradley is using for the commercial aircraft landing, because these aircraft were pretty close. We're only separated, I think, by 13 or 15 miles between the two airports. So the controller at Westfield is telling the aircraft cleared for takeoff, but the minute they they take off, they're talking to Bradley approach or departure, and they're getting their headings based on the other airplanes in the area. So, we can look at the history, especially of the past year, to see in fact where those tracks are. To Jane's point, we can't change the map until we do the noise exposure map, but at least we can see
We can evaluate it.
how it happened for the past year and confirm.
In fact, we will, because we'll want to see if there are things that we might want to do to
try to
change in that.
I mean, that may end up coordinating with Bradley, getting the air traffic facilities there and talking about departure paths and trying to mitigate certain turns if possible. So I just wanted to clarify.
So you can wave to the pilot and watch the afterburners. Yeah, that's not an exaggeration.
You can see the pilot.
You can see, right? And, we've got cracked walls and stuff in our house from the vibrations and
Pictures coming
whatnot,
off
pictures
the
falling
wall,
off the
teacups
walls.
coming down.
Yeah,
on the shelf.
You're welcome to come visit our neighborhood. Especially when they're flying, like today, I'm raking my lawn and they're right over my head. This gentleman's only 2 houses from me. That's on right now. He's got young kids. I feel sorry for his kids if they're outside playing because, they're going to lose their hearing. So it's whatever. Like I said, you're welcome to come walk the neighborhood when the planes are flying.
Okay, sounds good.
See what we're talking about.
Yep.
And well, I would suggest too that I understand that the FAA's got its rules and it has a model, but it seems to me to make a lot of sense to look at what's actually happening, particularly if you've got excellent data on what's happening, to make the new map that's going to be made in 2024. And the last comment I would make too is with the structures that have been taken down and some of the vegetation, it seems to me that some of the protection that those structures and vegetation afforded have been eliminated, based on some of this removal. So there's, I think, less sound dampening than what there used to be, at least between my house and the airport.
Yeah, so your first comment, that's exactly what would happen with the update of the maps is they would take a look at what is occurring over the last year or so and take that and put that into the model. So that is exactly what happens with model or noise exposure map updates. So.
All right. I also want to say one last thing. Thank you very much for having this meeting. I appreciate the work everybody's doing.
Well, thank you.
Thank you. We have any more questions? No? Okay. Well, thank you so much, everybody. We're going to end the Zoom meeting. And if you have individual or specific questions and you'd like to chat with us, we'll be available here. Or again, in the gym, we have large boards of our presentation. We're happy to talk to you about specific issues. Thank you very much. Have a good evening.
Thanks for making this available on Zoom.
Yep.